Humanity once believed silence was peaceful, until the day the silence answered back. It began with a single transmission, a faint echo from the far edge of Council-controlled space, where human ships had never been allowed to travel. No one in the galaxy expected that whisper to carry a warning. No one imagined it would mark the fall of the Galactic Council itself. And yet, in the weeks that followed, every civilization would speak of the same thing: how the greatest ruling power in known history collapsed under the weight of its own pride, leaving humanity to face the aftermath alone. For centuries, the Council had treated humans as a minor species, a stubborn and unpredictable outlier. They believed their own authority was uncheckable. They believed their rules, their borders, and their decisions were flawless. But the universe has a way of punishing hubris. And on that quiet day, when the message broke through the static, the facade of their perfection began to crack. What humanity didn't know was that the Council had been hiding something for years, something old, something dangerous, and something they were too proud to admit they couldn't control. In the days after the transmission, human outposts near the frontier reported strange signals, like broken songs drifting through deep space. Navigation systems flickered for seconds at a time. A few small research vessels went missing, leaving no distress call behind. The Council dismissed every incident as harmless anomalies. But humans, who had survived everything from planetary disasters to interstellar wars, were the first to sense the change in the air. There was a pressure building in the void, as if the stars themselves were waiting for something. A small human exploratory cruiser, nothing special, just a patrol ship with a dedicated crew, was the first to jump into the region from where the transmission originated. They expected to find debris or maybe an abandoned station. They didn't expect to find the remains of a Council flagship drifting without power. The hull was unscarred, untouched by weapons fire. It simply looked empty, dead, as if the crew had walked out of existence. That discovery sent a shock through every human hearing the report. If a Council flagship, armed with the best technology in the galaxy, could vanish without a fight, then something far worse than a simple malfunction had occurred. The Council refused to comment, choosing instead to tighten security and shut down information channels. But humans are good at noticing what others try to hide. Soon, whispers spread across human colonies, whispers of an ancient threat, a forgotten experiment, or a secret the Council had buried long before humanity ever joined galactic society. No one knew which version was true. All they knew was that the silence growing across the stars felt like a warning. Tension grew between humans and the Council as more sectors went dark. Entire communication grids powered by Council tech failed at random, leaving colonies isolated for hours. Cargo ships reappeared off course, their crew shaken but unharmed, unable to explain how they got lost. Even the Council's most loyal species began to question if their leaders had lost control. Humanity, once treated as insignificant, was the only one openly preparing for the unknown. Human fleets increased patrols. Scientists analyzed the strange patterns hidden in the transmissions. And ordinary people braced themselves, trusting their instinct more than the Council's reassurances. Then the silence deepened. Out of nowhere, the Council's central station, its political heart, a structure so massive it held millions, went dark. No broadcasts, no signals. No emergency calls, it simply disappeared from the network. The moment it happened, every human captain, soldier, and civilian felt the same chill. The Council hadn't ordered anything. They couldn't. And for the first time in galactic history, humans realized the Council had been afraid all along. What came next was chaos. Territory lines meant nothing. Species that once depended on Council protection scrambled to defend themselves. Human space became a beacon of activity as ships moved in coordinated lines, preparing for a threat they had never seen and could barely understand. Humanity's reputation for resilience became their greatest shield and their greatest risk. Because now, every eye in the galaxy turned toward them, some in hope, others in fear. As human fleets pushed deeper into the abandoned Council sectors, they discovered the truth wasn't hiding in shadows. It was right there, waiting, watching, as if testing who would make the first move. And just when humanity believed they were close to understanding what had happened, a second transmission echoed across their channels. This time, it wasn't faint. It wasn't broken, it was clear, steady, and unmistakably directed at them. It spoke only 5 words. And after hearing them, humanity understood the real terror wasn't the Council's fall. It was what had been waiting for it. The screen of the patrol ship flickered once, and then the message repeated. The message repeated again, steady and cold, as if whoever sent it didn't care whether humanity understood it or not. The crew of the patrol ship stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the tone, the rhythm, the strange echo hidden behind the words. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't a request either. It felt more like a statement, one delivered with the confidence of something that had been watching for a long time. The transmission carried no signature, no coordinates, nothing to trace. Just those 5 words that now hung in the minds of every listener. Human command centers tried to decode it, but all they uncovered were layers of distortion that seemed intentional. Some analysts claimed the message was spliced together from fragments of older Council languages, mixed with something unfamiliar. Others believed it was a warning left behind by the last Council survivors. But deep down, most humans knew the truth. This wasn't the Council. Whatever had spoken, it wasn't part of the political structure that fell. It was something else living in the void the Council left behind. As the hours passed, more reports came from the frontier. Patrol ships detected faint energy trails that didn't match any known engine type. Survey drones vanished the moment they crossed certain boundaries. Even long-range sensors, built to withstand the harshest environments, began returning patterns that looked almost like movement, slow, deliberate, unpredictable movement. Humanity had always believed space was empty, but now it felt like something unseen was shifting in the dark, paying attention to every step they took. Human scientists dug deeper into the silence that swallowed the Council. They sifted through old archives, treaties, and files long forgotten. One researcher found restricted documents hinting at a massive Council experiment conducted centuries ago, something abandoned after a catastrophic failure. Another uncovered evidence that the Council had removed several star systems from official charts, claiming they were unstable. But no one had questioned why entire systems needed erasing. No one had wondered why they were forbidden zones. Now those erased systems were becoming active on human sensors. A few human diplomats tried reaching out to species that once depended on the Council, searching for answers or alliances. Most responded with fear, insisting they wanted nothing to do with whatever had destroyed their leaders. Some blamed the humans, believing humanity's stubborn independence had angered the Council somehow. But a few whispered quietly about legends-old stories of an ancient intelligence buried deep in uncharted space, waiting for the perfect moment to return. They never said what kind of intelligence it was. They never gave it a name. They just warned that the Council had tried to contain something they couldn't understand, and humanity was now standing where the Council once stood. Back in human space, people felt the tension even if they didn't fully know what was happening. Families stayed close to home. Civilian ships moved in guarded convoys. News networks spoke carefully, avoiding panic but unable to hide the fact that something enormous was unfolding. Humanity wasn't just dealing with a political collapse. They were facing a threat that moved in silence, that erased, that watched. Among the human fleets sent into the abandoned Council sectors, one task group reported a chilling discovery. They found stations still powered, but empty. Food untouched, lights still glowing, systems running perfectly. But every living being was gone, no signs of struggle, no evacuation logs. It was as if they had simply stepped into thin air. The longer the human crew stayed, the more they felt a pressure, a quiet heaviness pressing down on their minds. The moment they retreated, the pressure lifted. It wasn't harmful, yet, but it made them feel observed, evaluated. Human command issued orders to expand search routes but remain cautious. Humanity needed answers, but not at the cost of losing entire crews. Yet something about the silence was drawing them in. Every time they pulled away, new signals appeared deeper inside the abandoned zone signals, mimicking human communication patterns, as if trying to lure them forward. No one knew if it was a trap or a test. In the middle of this growing uncertainty, the second patrol ship encountered something the crew couldn't explain. They detected a structure floating in deep space, enormous and geometric, like a monument built from reflections rather than metal. It didn't show up on sensors until they were almost on top of it. It wasn't of council design, nor human, nor from any species recorded in the database. And when they tried scanning it, the same 5-word message echoed across their system again, this time louder, sharper, almost impatient. The ship retreated immediately, but the message followed them all the way back to the nearest human outpost. That was when Command realized this wasn't a random broadcast. Whoever sent the message knew exactly where the humans were. They were tracking their movements with unsettling precision. Fear grew, but so did determination. Humanity had survived too much to back down now. They understood that silence didn't come from emptiness. Something had filled the void the Council once controlled, something that had waited for the perfect moment to step forward. And humanity, whether prepared or not, was now standing face to face with it. No one knew what the 5 words truly meant. No one dared to guess what would come next. But every human, from commanders to civilians, felt one thing clearly: the silence was no longer empty, it was answering. And whatever was speaking wanted them to hear. The human outpost that received the repeated message quickly became the center of attention. Officers crowded around the main display, watching the waveform pulse across the screen like a slow heartbeat. Technicians tried to filter out the distortions, but every attempt only made the message sound sharper, more focused, as if the sender adjusted itself in real time. Nothing in the Council archives, nothing in human studies, nothing in the database matched this level of adaptive communication. And that was what unsettled the humans most. Whatever was speaking to them wasn't guessing. It understood them. Within hours, Human Command held an emergency meeting. Fleet leaders, scientists, strategists, and diplomats joined through secure channels. They didn't argue like they usually did. Instead, they leaned forward, speaking carefully, knowing their next decisions could determine humanity's survival. Some argued the message was a warning. Others believed it was a summons. A few feared it was preparation for something worse. No matter the interpretation, all agreed on one thing: the mystery had to be faced. While the higher ranks debated, the crews in the field sensed the pressure growing stronger each day. The patrol vessel that first encountered the strange structure reported that their dreams had started to shift. Not nightmares, just images of stars drifting in unnatural patterns or echoes of footsteps where no one walked. They didn't speak about it openly, worried they would be grounded. But their silence only created more stress among them. Humans had dealt with fear before, but this kind of creeping unease was new, and it wore down even the toughest minds. A small research team aboard a science ship, stationed near the edge of the abandoned Council zone, picked up faint signals that seemed to mimic human communication codes. At first they thought it was a lost transport or damaged beacon. But when they decoded the signals, they realized they were receiving fragments of human voices of crew members who were still alive and standing right beside them. It was as if something was copying their voices in real time, testing how well it could imitate them. The researchers sent the recordings to Command, but the moment they did, the signals vanished completely. It was like something had realized it had been noticed. As more unsettling incidents piled up, a quiet divide began forming within human leadership. One side wanted to advance deeper into the abandoned zones, arguing that answers couldn't be found from a distance. The other side urged caution, believing the Council had fallen for a reason, and repeating their mistakes could be fatal. The tension between these groups simmered beneath every discussion. No one wanted to admit it, but humanity was beginning to fracture the way the Council once had. Amid all of this, civilian life didn't stop. In the human colonies closest to the frontier, people lived with the constant fear that something unseen was watching. Shops stayed open, but conversations were whispered. Schools continued, but parents stayed nearby. Even the skies above the colonies looked different, as human defense fleets hovered like silent guardians. People trusted the fleets, but they also knew the fleets didn't truly understand what they were up against. In one outer colony, a group of engineers working on a communication relay reported seeing lights flicker across the sky, moving in patterns that didn't match any ship in the registry. The lights vanished before they could be recorded, leaving the engineers unsure whether they had witnessed something real or tricked by their own worries. Still, the report made its way to command, adding to the growing list of unexplained events spreading through human space. Back at the frontier, the most experienced human fleet tasked with mapping the abandoned council sectors made a breakthrough. They discovered a region where the silence felt stronger, almost dense, as if the space itself had weight. Their sensors kept detecting signals that resembled human systems, but every attempt to lock onto a source failed. It was like chasing a reflection on water. The deeper they moved, the stronger the repeating message became, until it echoed through every vessel. Those 5 words grew louder, clearer, almost impatient, pushing the humans to react. But the fleet couldn't turn back. Something strange was happening beyond their scanners. They could see faint shadows, large shapes moving slowly, drifting just outside visual range. They weren't ships, at least not in any recognizable form. They didn't emit heat or energy, yet they distorted the space around them like massive objects. The fleet watched in tense silence, unsure whether these shapes were living, mechanical, or something in between. Then, one of the shapes seemed to shift, almost like it was turning to look at them. The ships immediately retreated, but the shape didn't follow. It simply drifted back into the dark, vanishing as if it had never existed. The fleet reported everything, but even then, humanity couldn't decide what the shapes represented. Were they the Council's old enemy? A failed experiment? Something ancient the Council had tried to erase? Or were they the source of the silence itself? As more evidence surfaced, one unsettling truth became clear. Whatever destroyed the Council wasn't gone. It was active, aware, and watching humanity step into the vacuum left behind. And for reasons no one could explain, it had chosen to speak to humans first. The message repeated again and again, echoing through ships, stations, and colonies. And humanity realized that the silence wasn't just a backdrop, it was the beginning of something far bigger, something waiting for them to make their next move. The repeating message grew so constant that human crews began to feel it before they heard it. It pulsed through the metal of their ships, through their comboards, through the long stretches of quiet between transmissions. Even when the speakers were muted, the memory of those 5 words lingered in their minds like an echo they couldn't push away. Humans weren't dealing with a simple signal anymore. It felt like something was trying to break through a door that wasn't meant to open. At the edge of the abandoned council sectors, the main human fleet started picking up new distortions, sharp spikes, faint vibrations in the background noise, and rhythmic fluctuations that didn't match any natural event. Some believed they were signs of movement. Others thought they were signals layered beneath the message itself, hidden codes waiting to be uncovered. The fleet's analysts worked day and night, pulling apart the patterns, hoping to find some piece of truth. But every time they made progress, the message changed slightly, as if responding to their attempts. It was subtle, but enough to remind them they were not alone in the dark. On one of the command ships, the captain watched the shadows drift across the sensor screens. She had seen many things in her career, battles between species, strange cosmic storms, forgotten ruins floating through the void, but nothing unnerved her like those slow-moving shapes. They didn't behave like anything natural. They weren't aggressive, yet they didn't retreat either. They seemed to exist in a state between presence and absence, appearing only when they wanted to be seen. The captain's second-in-command noticed a pattern in the shadow's movement. Each time the fleet shifted position, the shapes adjusted ever so slightly, as if maintaining a certain distance, not too close. Not too far, watching, waiting. It felt like the shapes were studying the humans, observing how they reacted, how they coordinated, how they handled fear. Back in human space, civilians began reporting dreams similar to those experienced by crew members at the frontier. Many described standing in a silent place with no stars, only a dim glow in the distance. Others spoke of hearing whispers in languages they had never learned. These dreams weren't harmful, but their spread was alarming. They reached sectors far from the frontier, sectors untouched by the abandoned zones. Human scientists struggled to explain how such dreams could occur simultaneously across vast distances. Theories ranged from psychological stress to unknown waves spreading through subspace. But none of the explanations fully made sense. Meanwhile, Human Command made the controversial decision to send a specialized research vessel into the deepest part of the abandoned sectors, far beyond where any human ship had gone since the fall of the Council. The crew selected for this mission was experienced, calm under pressure, and prepared for the unknown. Yet even they felt a tightness in their chest as they approached the coordinates. The silence grew heavier the closer they came, like thick air pressing against the hull. The moment they crossed into the designated zone, the message changed again. The 5 words repeated, but with a new undertone, almost like a second voice joining in. For the first time, it felt emotional calm, but filled with something ancient. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They continued deeper, guided by faint energy trails that pulsed like veins spreading across the void. Eventually, their ship approached another structure larger than the one previously discovered. This one was shaped like a ring suspended in nothingness, its surface smooth and reflective, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. As the ship drew closer, the message abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was sharp, stretched tight like a string on the edge of snapping. The crew held their breath as their ship drifted inches away from the strange ring. Their instruments fluctuated wildly, unable to decide whether the structure was solid or hollow, active or dormant. One moment it read as ancient beyond comprehension. The next, it seemed newly formed, as if built moments before their arrival. Then the lights on the ship flickered once. The comm system crackled. And a new sound rose from the speakers, not words, not whispers, but a low hum that vibrated through the crew's bones. It grew louder, deeper, until the screens around them flashed with symbols no one could interpret. These symbols weren't of any known species. They weren't numbers, letters, or shapes recognized by any cultural database. They felt like impressions, memories pressed into the human mind with overwhelming clarity. Back at Human Command, every screen linked to the ship went white. The transmission feed became flooded with unreadable data. Analysts scrambled, trying to stabilize the connection. The fleet near the frontier turned toward the coordinates, engines roaring as they prepared to intervene. Everyone sensed it at the same moment. This was the turning point. Something was happening that the Council had once feared, something they couldn't control, something powerful enough to erase their existence. As the research vessel hovered before the silent ring, the shadows across the sector began to converge. Dozens of them drifted in from all directions, moving with purpose for the first time. The fleet tracking them watched with disbelief. The shapes weren't random or uncoordinated. They were gathering, forming a pattern, encircling an invisible point in space. The message returned, not 5 words this time. Just one, clear, focused, directed at humanity alone. And the moment they heard it, every human from commanders to civilians felt the weight of the universe shift, as if everything they feared was finally standing at the door, ready to step through. The single word echoed across every human ship and outpost, vibrating through the comm channels with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't hostile. It was simply delivered with a certainty that made every listener freeze in place. For a long moment, humanity didn't know whether to feel threatened or warned. The word was simple, but the weight behind it felt immense, like a decision had been made long before they ever heard it. And then the second twist hit. The research vessel that had been facing the silent ring suddenly transmitted a data burst, massive, uncontrolled, unlike anything their systems should have been able to send. Screens across Human Command, colony networks, and fleet channels flickered with the same image, a star map. But it wasn't the familiar layout of human or council space. It showed regions beyond them, systems erased from history, entire stretches of the galaxy hidden behind layers of interference. As the map rotated, highlighted points pulsed in red, marking places where something had already moved. But what made every human go silent wasn't the unfamiliar regions. It was the final point on the map, the one glowing brightest, a human colony, one of the oldest, one of the most peaceful, not near the frontier, but deep inside human territory. No one had detected anything there, no strange signals. No shadows, no disturbances, yet the map insisted. Something was already there. The research vessel's crew tried to explain the data stream, but their voices broke apart in static. The feed showed them standing in the control room, tense and alert, staring at the ring outside. Then the lights surged, washing their faces in white, and the transmission cut out completely. Human command erupted. Officers shouted orders, analysts scrambled through the data, and fleets received red alert directives. The idea that the silent threat had already infiltrated human space shattered any sense of distance or safety. Fear spread like wildfire, not the panic of civilians, but the sharp, focused fear of strategists who suddenly realized they had underestimated the scope of the conflict. A fleet was immediately dispatched toward the colony marked on the map. They were fast, heavily armed, and prepared for the unknown. But as they jumped through space, something unexpected happened. The shadows that had been drifting through the frontier sectors began to shift away from the research vessel and redirect themselves not toward the humans, but toward a distant point matching the colony's coordinates. It was as if the shapes were answering the same call. Humanity didn't know whether that meant the colony was in danger, or if something at the colony had triggered all of this. Meanwhile, inside command, one of the analysts discovered something buried deep within the data burst. A pattern subtle, repeating, hidden behind the map. At first it looked random, but the more he studied it, the clearer it became. The pattern wasn't a code, it was a message. A message that appeared to be human-designed. Someone had sent this. Someone human. But it couldn't be the research crew. They were accounted for in the feed until the very last moment, and no other human vessel was in that area, which meant the message had come from somewhere else entirely. When the analyst enhanced the audio buried beneath the static, he heard something faint, a voice speaking through layered distortion. A human voice, strained, urgent, repeating the same phrase. "Not what we thought." That was all. Over and over. It wasn't clear what it referred to, the silent threat, the shadows, the ring, or the council's fall. But hearing a human voice coming from a place no humans should have been shook everyone. It hinted that the council had never truly erased what they'd discovered. They had hidden it. Or maybe tried to negotiate with it. And if a human voice was reaching them now, it meant someone somewhere had survived something long enough to warn them. But the warning came too late. The fleet sent toward the colony dropped out of hyperspace and immediately saw signs that something was wrong. The colony's defense grid was active but not responding. Patrol ships floated in perfect formation, yet none moved. The colony lights were on, but every scanner showed the same impossible reading: no life signals. None. It was like the entire population had been replaced with silence. The fleet drew closer, moving with caution. As they scanned the colony's surface, they noticed an unnatural shimmer around several buildings, distortions, the same kind detected in the frontier. But these distortions were organized, arranged in patterns almost like symbols spreading across the colony floor. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. And then the shadows arrived. Dozens of them slipped out of hyperspace, drifting toward the colony with smooth, fluid motion. The fleet prepared to fire, but the shapes didn't attack. Instead, they positioned themselves around the colony, forming a perimeter, just as they had around the ring. The fleet held its breath, waiting, not knowing whether these entities were here to destroy or to prevent destruction. Then, without warning, the colony's comm systems activated, not through human tech, through the same strange frequency that carried the message. The screen on the lead fleet ship flickered, and a silhouette appeared, not human, but unmistakably shaped like one, tall, still, featureless but familiar in form. The 5-word message returned, pulsing through every ship. Then the silhouette leaned forward and the screen darkened. For the first time since this began, humanity realized the message wasn't just communication. It was a summons, and whatever had summoned them had finally arrived. The silhouette on the fleet screen held perfectly still, as if waiting for the humans to catch up. The 5 words echoed again, softer this time, almost calm. The fleet commander leaned forward, trying to make sense of its shape. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't hiding, it appeared patient. That confused everyone more than anything else. Humanity had expected force or fear or threats, but the silence was almost welcoming, as if the being didn't want destruction, it wanted recognition. Suddenly, the shimmering distortions on the colony surface began to shift. The patterns rearranged themselves, forming long lines that curved toward a central point. The shapes drifting in orbit slowly rotated, aligning like guardians preparing for a ritual. Every scanner in the fleet lit up at once. Energy readings surged, but not in a weaponized way. It felt like something ancient was unlocking, something dormant waking after centuries of being buried under the Council's lies. Then the colony itself seemed to exhale. A wave of soft light rippled through the buildings, washing away the distortions. And for the first time since the silent threat appeared, the fleet detected life. But not vanished colonists, humans, still in the colony, still alive. Their life signatures had been hidden, shielded by something the Council never taught anyone to understand. As the reading stabilized, the silhouette on the fleet screen finally moved. It raised an arm, slow and deliberate, and pointed toward the colony below, as if telling the humans to look closer. The fleet zoomed in with their scanners. On the colony streets, shapes began emerging from the fading light. People stepped out of buildings, confused, frightened, but unharmed. They looked around, searching for answers just like the fleet above. It didn't make sense. The colony had looked empty. Every reading had shown silence, but now the truth became clear. The silence wasn't their enemy. It was protection. A veil placed over the colony, shielding it from something else, something much larger. The fleet commander ordered a secure link to the colony. The moment the connection established, a trembling voice from the surface spoke. We didn't disappear. We were pulled out of phase. Hidden, protected, something was coming for us. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. If the silent beings had protected the colony, then who or what were they protecting it from? The answer came an instant later. A violent shockwave tore through the far side of the system. Every ship in the fleet staggered as alarms blared. Something massive was emerging from hyperspace. Not like the shadows, not quiet or subtle, but loud, chaotic, monstrous in scale. A rift opened, splitting the dark like a wound. The fleet turned toward it, and their screens filled with readings that made no sense at all. It was Council technology. But twisted, corrupted, mutated into something unrecognizable. The truth hit humanity with the force of a falling star. The Council hadn't been destroyed by the silent beings. They were running from their own creation. A failed experiment, a weapon. Something they built in secret and lost control of, something that wiped out entire systems with no warning. The Council had tried to contain it, hide it, erase the records. But their creation found them anyway. And in their desperation, they attempted to cloak entire worlds, just like the silent beings had done for the human colony. The difference was simple. The Council failed, but the silent watchers succeeded. The corrupted Council construct roared through the system, devouring energy, destabilizing space around it. The shadows shifted instantly, forming a defensive perimeter around the colony. The silhouette on the fleet screen raised its arm again, but this time it wasn't pointing. It was directing the shadows, guiding them into position with absolute authority. The fleet commander realized the silent beings weren't trying to replace humanity or control it. They were trying to recruit it. The command ship received a direct transmission, symbols and pulses that translated into a single human-readable concept. Help us stop what they unleashed. Human fleet captains didn't hesitate. Humanity had never backed down from a threat, and they refused to let another civilization's mistakes erase their own. The battle erupted in a storm of light and motion. Human ships fired coordinated volleys. The shadows charged with silent precision, bending gravity around themselves. The corrupted Council creation struck back, shaking space like a living storm. The colony below trembled as shock waves spread, forcing civilians to take shelter. Everything hung in a fragile balance. One final strike from the construct shattered half the defensive formation, but it exposed its core for a single moment long enough for humanity to act. The fleet commander ordered every ship to fire. The sky blazed white, and the construct collapsed in on itself, folding back through the rift from where it came. Silence returned. But a different silence, lighter, peaceful. The shadows drifted apart. The silhouette faded. The protective veil around the colony dissolved completely. Humanity had won. But just as the fleets began to report success, just as command prepared to celebrate survival, one last unexpected twist arrived. The star map from the research vessel reappeared on every screen. This time, more red markers glowed, dozens, hundreds, and a single new line of text appeared beneath it. Not from the Council, not from the silent beings, from the same human voice that had warned them earlier. They're waking everywhere. The dust settled slowly, drifting through the air like the final traces of a storm that had overstayed its welcome. For a long moment, the crew simply stood there, letting the silence wrap around them. It wasn't the cold silence of fear anymore, nor the heavy tension that had followed them from one star system to another. It felt calmer, warmer, like the first breath after realizing you survived something you didn't think you would. Zara looked around at each member of her team, seeing exhaustion in their faces but also determination and relief. The main conflict was finally over, and the threat that had chased humanity across the stars had come to an end. Still, she felt something tugging at the back of her mind, a reminder that even victories came with questions. Nathan stepped beside her, running a hand through his hair as he stared at the quiet reactor core. "Hard to believe," he whispered. "All this time, and it ends here." She nodded. "It had to end somewhere. At least we can walk away knowing we did what we could." She wasn't trying to sound strong. She simply meant it. They had faced the unknown, stood inside the heart of an enemy that seemed unstoppable, and somehow held their ground long enough to change everything. That alone was more than any of them had imagined when this mission began. The rest of the crew moved through the room, checking the systems one last time. The ship hummed softly like it was finally resting with them. After everything, the impossible choices, the close calls, the loss of people they cared about, there was comfort in seeing the ship alive and stable again. It felt like a companion rather than a machine, something that had survived with them instead of just carrying them. Aiden leaned against the railing, watching the final bursts of energy fade into the ether outside the viewing window. "We should report back to command," he said, though his voice was softer than usual. "They're going to want answers, and honestly—" "So do I?" Zara understood what he meant. They had stopped the threat, destroyed the device that had the power to collapse entire worlds, and uncovered secrets buried for generations. But there were still pieces missing: origins, motives, hidden truths about why the enemy had pushed so hard and why humanity had been dragged into a war it never asked for. The answers they did have felt like fragments of a bigger picture. Still, she knew not every mystery needed to be solved today. Right now, they needed closure, not more battles. As they left the core chamber, the narrow corridor felt different than before. Without the pressure of fear and the urgency of danger pushing against them, Zara felt the weight lifting step by step. It wasn't complete freedom, not yet, but it felt like hope stretching its wings again. The crew began to talk quietly, exchanging small jokes, sharing glances that said everything words didn't need to. They had survived together, and that alone formed a bond nothing could undo. In the command deck, the screens flickered with the afterglow of the last transmission they had intercepted moments before destroying the device. A final message from the enemy commander, cryptic, almost resigned, lingered in Zara's thoughts. It suggested a deeper struggle within their ranks, something that hinted the war had been more complicated than either side realized. But the message also carried something else, an unexpected warning. Nathan noticed her staring at the console. "Still thinking about that?" he asked. "I can't help it," she admitted. "He knew we were coming. He knew we'd win, but he still warned us. And I keep wondering why. Maybe he wanted the same end we did," Nathan said. "Peace, a way out. Maybe," she murmured. "But it feels like there's more." Even then, she didn't feel fear, just curiosity, a quiet awareness that the galaxy was still bigger than anything they could imagine. The main conflict had ended, but the universe never stopped moving, never stopped shifting. The important thing was they had pushed back against the darkness and given light another chance to grow. The ship drifted toward the nearest safe zone where they would regroup and send their final report. Outside the windows, stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Each one looked peaceful from afar, though Zara knew better. Every star held stories, struggles, and people trying to survive just like them. She wondered what worlds they might visit next, what alliances they might form now that humanity had proven it was stronger than anyone believed. As the engines hummed and the crew settled into quiet tasks, Zara felt something rare, a calm sense of satisfaction. Not pride, not victory, just peace. The kind of peace that came from knowing they had done what needed to be done and could finally breathe again. Before she turned away from the viewing window, she let her eyes rest on the stars one last time. "We made it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." It was a simple promise, but it felt right. No grand speeches, no dramatic declarations. Just truth. The journey wasn't over, but this chapter was. And as the ship carried them home, Zara hoped their story would remind others across every distant world that even in the darkest moments humanity could rise, endure, and choose hope again. And that was enough.